Hey, this is Professor Gould, and in this set of lectures, we're going to talk about the process of photosynthesis. And we're going to start out with the source of energy in photosynthesis, which is light energy. So, the photosynthesizers in the earth, everybody thinks about plants, especially trees. But as you can see from this map that shows the amount of chlorophyll and photosynthetic activity in different parts of the world, you can see some of the big chlorophyll concentrations are here at the equator in the oceans. There's tons of photosynthetic organisms in the oceans. And those are a lot of algae and single-celled algae and single-celled protists. So don't just thank the trees, all of this cool green stuff, but also thank the little algae in the oceans. All right, so we did cellular respiration, which you remember we combine glucose with oxygen gas, bunch of reactions. We get carbon dioxide, water, and a bunch of ATPs. Now, photosynthesis is going to kind of be the opposite. We're going to start with carbon dioxide and water, go through a bunch of reactions, and add energy to create glucose or other sugars and oxygen gas. So oxygen gas is now the product rather than the reactant. Okay, so you do need to know both of these equations. So make sure you get those. All right, so what we see, what we call visible light, is a really small portion of the radiation produced by the sun. So here you can see the full spectrum of radiation, and the visible light is just this tiny little section right here. The shorter wavelengths are ultraviolet, and then X-rays, and then gamma rays. Longer wavelengths and less power are infrared, and then radio waves. So just keep that in mind. This also refers to visible to the human eye. Visible light does not mean visible to any organisms. There are a lot of organisms that can see UV and infrared light. Birds, for example, a lot of birds can see UV light. So when we say visible, we just mean to the human eye. All right, so this shows the types of visible light, the different wavelengths, and you can see that red has a much longer wavelength. That is the distance from one peak to the next. It's a lot longer than blue and indigo and violet. Shorter wavelengths mean more energy. Longer wavelengths mean less energy. Okay? Photosynthetic organisms don't use all of these wavelengths. And one thing about light, and this I have to like really think about this all the time because it just makes me kind of crazy. Light is sort of backwards in that what we see is not what is absorbed by something, but what is reflected by something. So the reason that plants appear green, the reason that most photosynthetic organisms appear green, is that they don't use green light. They absorb all the other colors of light and they reflect green. So green is the color that is not used by most organisms for photosynthesis. Okay, so how did we figure this out? So there was this really elegant experiment by this guy, Theodore Engelmann, in 1883. And what he did was he shined light through a prism, which splits light into its various wavelengths. And he shined that light onto a microscope slide. And on that microscope slide, he had put two things. One is a photosynthetic algae. This one with this little corkscrew shape inside, this is actually called Spirogyra. It is my favorite algae. Thanks for asking. Spirogyra is photosynthetic, so it makes oxygen. Engelmann also put non-photosynthetic bacteria on the microscope slide. And he left it for a bit. And what he found was that the bacteria, which are not photosynthetic, they were clustered at the purple-blue end and at the red-orange end of the slide. because those algal cells in those areas were doing photosynthesis and were able to produce oxygen. So the bacteria were able to survive because they had oxygen. Here in the green and yellow range, there's almost no bacteria because the algae isn't able to do photosynthesis. Ta-da! So that's how that worked. All right, so the pigments that actually absorb these different colors, the two main pigments, there's actually two kinds of chlorophyll. I know you've heard of chlorophyll, the green pigment. There's actually two kinds, A and B. Chlorophyll A is the primary pigment, and you can see it absorbs at the violet range, less in the blue range, and over here in the red range. Chlorophyll B absorbs blue and orange light. It's going to then pass that energy to chlorophyll A. For the purposes of this lecture, don't worry too much about which chlorophyll is which. Okay, just know that there's these two chlorophylls and that neither of them is very good at using red, yellow, or orange light. All right. There is another group of pigments called carotenoids, which tend to look yellow and orange because they reflect those lights. They use more of the blue and green spectrum, part of the, a little bit of the purple, the violet. All right. The carotenoids, they're the ones that absorb the blue and green and reflect the yellow and red and orange. And they, excuse me, here we are, they are also found in most photosynthetic organisms, especially plants. And in plants, they're really important because they actually protect chlorophyll from getting too much light energy. Also, as plants do less photosynthesis in the fall, the chlorophyll starts to break down, and the carotenoids break down more slowly. So the carotenoids stick around, and that is why the leaves turn orange and red. How cool is that? All right, so we're going to stop there for this lecture. And then in the next one, we're going to talk about the structure of the chloroplast.